So let's get started. So I'm Stuart Scott Goldstone. I'm the head of the corporate commercial law team at Aaron&Partners. We're solicitors, lawyers in the UK. Also joining as a host today is Larry, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Yes, thank you, Stuart. Yes, my name is Larry Crowther at Wegman Hessler, Cleveland, Ohio. I'm glad your folks were able to join us. So this is a program that I've discussed with the Aaron&Partners team over the years, and due to logistics, we were not able to do it. But so with the craziness of the pandemic, we're able to do this. So I appreciate everybody getting on. I know we've all done enough webinars lately, so hopefully we can keep this interesting and informative. And so about our firm. So we've been in business for over 50 years at our location here in Cleveland, Ohio. We have about 25 lawyers. We are primarily, we're a full service firm, but we're primarily a business law firm. And from Ohio, we represent lots of Ohio businesses, but we also represent other businesses and their activities throughout the United States and also internationally as far as distribution of products and purchasing of goods. So we also have a strong estate planning department and commercial litigation. And we also have a strong intellectual property practice. So we'll be hearing from some representatives of those different departments later on today. Stuart, you can go ahead about Aaron's.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we're a UK law firm. Like Larry's firm, we're also a full service firm, principally based though on businesses, owner managed businesses in particular, and covering all the usual legal areas that those types of businesses will need. So that will be transactions when you're buying or selling businesses, commercial contracts, supply chain arrangements, dealing with real estate and property issues, employment law, dispute resolution, and all types of litigation. The specialisms we have are around particular sectors. It's mentioned on the slide there: transport and logistics, renewable energy, manufacturing, and the waste in particular, and also increasingly national work and dealing with transactions where there's a UK aspect to them, and dealing with lots of global transactions that may involve, again, buying and selling companies, commercial collaborations, joint ventures, licensing of intellectual property, all range of things. And also, we're also there to deal with the private legal interests of business owners who need advice on their tax planning, family matters, buying and selling their property. They're all things we cover. Thank you.
All right, so I'll talk next briefly about Iag Global. So this is a network of lawyers and accountants throughout the world. This is how I've gotten to know the Aaron's firm. And what it is, it's a great network of law firms and accounting firms in the major cities throughout the world. So if I need a lawyer pretty much in any major city of the world, I either have a personal relationship with that person through the meetings that we have annually. We have 3 meetings a year, and we're usually try to attend at least 2 of those a year. So we've gotten to know each other well. So if there's not somebody I know that's in that city, I can call somebody in that country and get a good referral. And what this does, it enables us to make referrals for our clients to conduct business in other countries with a strong degree of confidence that the client's going to be well represented. So our firms have been a member for 10 years. I think, Stuart, you guys have been a member since Stuart moved over maybe 8 years ago.
Yeah, 2014, and it's where we were involved for the same reasons that women are as well. We've actually formed a group now within our firm, Aaron's International, to deal with all the international aspects of our and being a member of IAG is an important.
Okay, so we're going to start out with the polling question to make sure you all can use your computer buttons. So our question is, so are you actively considering developing a US-based business presence in 2021? So we can go ahead and people populate that. Should we go on here and then we can look at that once it's been populated? Oh, okay, well, wait a minute.
Just a couple more people to respond.
Okay, I don't know if everyone, just the English folks are gonna respond or?
Everybody that's on the call.
All right.
This is relevant to. All right, I'm going to end the poll and then I'm going to share the results. So here's what we have.
Well, we hope that when we're done with this poll, we'll increase the yeses.
Yeah, and I suppose it'd be interesting to learn either today or afterwards, well, why some people aren't considering that, and maybe there, as you say, there's some things we can
improve interest.
With that percentage. Okay.
Okay, so first we thought that since the folks in Great Britain might not know exactly where Cleveland is, and some of the U.S. people might not know exactly where Chester is, we have a couple maps here. So I'll go first. So we are located in Cleveland, Ohio, which is located sort of halfway between New York City and Chicago. And then up north in Canada is Toronto's nearby too. And I'll let Mindy talk about some of the business benefits of our location. But I did want to say that, you know, we are in the Midwest, and Chester's up in northern England. And I think our approach to business and other matters is really pretty similar. So I'll let Stuart go ahead.
Yeah, so Chester's obviously in the, as you can see, in the northwest of England, and I guess it has it's part of England whose history is historically has been about industry and manufacturing, although that's very much changed to become as much the area of the country is much manufacturing, and with technology, high technology involved in that as well, and I guess also a large aspect of an agricultural area as well, in particular, and the other areas around it. We're also close to the border with Wales as well, that similar background. Our offices, head office in Chester there, that's only a short step to Manchester, where we also have a base at Airport City there, international airport all over the world. Yeah, I think there are quite a lot of similarities in terms of the business scene in our area and in Cleveland as well.
Okay, and then I think we're going to have Mindy who's going to be able to discuss a little more detail about Ohio and UK business. So Mindy.
Absolutely. Thanks so much to Aaron&Partners and Wegman Hessler for inviting us to talk to our UK friends about what is so great about the US, Ohio, and the Cleveland area. So I'm going to give you some level setting statistics. The UK has had a very long tradition of investment in the United States, and Ohio is no exception to that. If you don't know much about Ohio, because perhaps you're more familiar with New York and Florida, LA and San Francisco, we're going to tell you about that here in a minute. But things you should know about us is that we're a large state with a highly successful economy. There's nearly 12 million of us, 676 billion in a gross state product, and 5 million people in our workforce. So just to give you some of the numbers, we are a big population state. Just to give you a sense of imports from the UK, certainly the UK imports a lot of products into the United States and into Ohio. You're our 7th largest trading partner. Huge amount of value to that, almost 61 billion, and that was even a couple of years ago, so it's even higher now, 2.4% of our total imports. And what we're looking to get in from the UK lately has been in industrial, machinery and iron and steel products. Northeast Ohio, the Cleveland area, is traditionally a manufacturing economy, but I will say over time we've seen that the investment from the UK has been actually more on the service side. So certainly imports are coming not just in goods but in services. You can see the flow chart here will show you just the way that the import totals have kind of changed from year to year, and certainly we're hoping that with the UK-US trade agreement that'll be signed at some point here, we will see that number rise exponentially. Additionally, we would tell you that Ohio is the 7th largest state of all of our 50 states. And in the United States, we do consider ourselves individual economies. If Ohio was its own country, we would be the 21st largest in the world. That's about the size of Sweden. If you think about the size of the Swedish economy is about the same size as Ohio's. And certainly what you're going to find in Ohio is going to be a cost savings 20 to 30% cheaper than on the coasts of the United States. So 20 to 30% cheaper than the east side of the United States, New York, Florida, or the west side, San Francisco and Los Angeles. And we have already a very large amount of UK investment in our state already. Almost 600 UK firms call Ohio home, 37,000 people employed by the British, and that's 14% of our overall international employment. And this slide is going to give you a taste of some of our top UK firms. In the subsequent slides here, we're going to tell you how we help companies, but this gives you a taste of some of the UK-based firms that we have helped through their expansion plans over the years. And you can see that they're going to range from services to hard manufacturing goods and sort of everything in between.
Okay, thank you, Mindy. We'll hear a little more about the programs that can be available for companies that are looking to invest in Ohio from Mindy later on. She's with Team NEO. Okay, so I was just going to briefly go over the topics we're hoping to go through here today to provide information to folks. So first one is just matters to consider when entering or expanding in the U.S. From a high level, legal differences between the U.S. and U.K. 3 is financial and tax implications of doing business in the U.S. 4 is resources, incentives, and advantages of setting up business in the U.S. 5 is human side of living in the U.S., sort of the network of the British community here in Northeast Ohio. 6 is lessons learned, and we have one of Aaron's clients will be joining us to help on that. And then 7 is just a general catch up on why we're doing this presentation today and why we're enthusiastic about having the opportunity to work with you folks here to come into business here in the U.S.
Okay. So yes, I will allow everyone on the panel just to give a brief introduction of who they are and their areas of experience. I guess myself, I've kind of already done that, but Larry, do you want to say a little about your areas of work?
Yeah, so I'm a business lawyer and have had the opportunity to work in a lot of international matters and look forward to doing more. Do you want me? Should I run through the other panelists, or should we have each person do a quick?
Yeah, that's Chris. I think you're next there.
I'd be happy to. I am Chris Holacek. I am Larry's longtime legal partner. I handle civil litigation. I've been practicing civil litigation for more years than I care to admit, but it's been over 30 years. And I'm going to be talking about the inside view of civil litigation in the United States.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Jessica?
Hi, Jessica McKeegan. I work with Chris and Larry. I'm in the civil litigation department at Wegman. I practice business litigation, and one of my specialties is employment law.
Great, thank you. Jason?
Yep. Hello, everyone. Jason Wargel, also with the Wegman firm. I head up our intellectual property department. I'm here with a little over 20 years of experience, help companies protect their inventions and brand names, and then counsel companies when they're trying to introduce products and new names into the market.
Great. Chris Carey?
Hi, I'm Chris Carey. I am the Vice President of the British American Chamber of Commerce, helping to, bring together businesses and foster the relationship between the US and the UK. through both business and political avenues.
Thanks. Mindy?
Good morning again, Mindy McLaughlin. I'm the Managing Director of Global Business Development for Team NEO, which is a regional economic development entity that covers Cleveland, and I'm helping UK and other international companies find a soft landing spot in Ohio.
Thanks, Mindy. Becky?
Hi, thank you. My name's Becky Stark. I run my own business, Stark Export Focus. I've got over 30 years experience in international trade, and I help companies. I've worked with government agencies across the UK, DIT, Welsh Government, British Chambers of Commerce, and independently, helping companies to develop international trade strategies and with the very practical aspects of international trade. So it's the whole gambit really of getting goods to market. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Christy?
I'm Christy Waska-Boynick. I'm with the firm of Dyke Yaxley. We're a international accountancy firm with offices in Shrewsbury, Shropshire in the UK, and Cleveland here in the US. We handle international taxation, not only on an individual level, but a big portion of our business is working with UK companies that come to the US to understand the whole picture of taxation and all the nuances involved in that. And we are also members of the British American Chamber here in Cleveland.
Okay, thanks everyone. So let's move on to the questions and topics for discussion. So the first one is, what should UK companies consider when evaluating the opportunity in the US? So maybe Larry, you could give your thoughts on that.
Okay, well, as a lawyer, I would say you need to consider as part of your due diligence would be making sure you understand the differences between the UK laws and the US laws with regard to business. And I'm hoping that when we speak, you feel more comfortable after we've made our presentation on those matters.
Christy, what are your thoughts?
Must most definitely understand the taxation implications of moving to the US. The US is very different than the UK because we are, as Mindy mentioned, we're made up of 50 little mini economies within under this federal umbrella. So understanding that we have layers of taxation, federal, state, and potentially also local, and understanding that what looks like may be an obstacle because it's different from what you work with or deal with in the UK, but everything can be understood and mastered. It's not something that should keep anyone away from looking at the US and Northeast Ohio. We've got 10 years of experience of UK clients investing in this economy, and there are so many strategies to work around any harsh tax regimes and to make sure that you pay tax at the most effective rate.
Okay, thanks. Mindy?
Sure, I think there's probably three things I would say here, three things British companies need to understand, knowing that the UK and the US are different with our 50 state sort of strategy, is that it comes down to speed, risk, and cost. You really need to evaluate your location decision based on what that state's regulatory environment looks like, what levels of support you might be able to realize, and then of course knowing that different areas of the United States just cost differently, and that the interior of the country is a place that you should consider for those reasons.
Okay, great. And Becky, obviously you'll have your views based on your practical experience of this type of discussion and consideration before you make your first move. Hi, Becky, you're on mute.
Sorry. No, I think obviously a lot of that is high level once people have made a decision and they're making that research investigation. But a lot of companies, it's just, I think, strategically researching actually whether it's the right position for your business in terms of geographical location per se. So once you've made that decision strategically, is it the right place? Thinking about time zones, about access to markets, and I think those sort of more fundamental due diligence thought before you then get into the nitty gritty around the local laws and taxes. That's sort of the next step on. But thinking, you know, I think we in the UK fail to appreciate how big the States is actually sometimes, and how big an area it is to cover in different time zones, for example. So, and how to service that as well from an operational level. So.
Great. Well, I think that leads us on probably to the next, quite nicely to the next question. So what type of due diligence should a UK company conduct before entering the US? So we'll start again with Larry. From the legal perspective.
So what we're going to do here is just kind of, each of us will give just a brief comment on what we'll be discussing in detail as soon as we're done here. So my topics will relate to product distribution, entity selection, and a legal update.
Okay.
Chris?
Chris?
Yeah, my topics will include civil litigation and some of the pitfalls and challenges that you should expect to have to deal with in doing business in the United States and in Ohio.
Okay. Jessica?
Sure. Yeah, my topics will include just a general overview of distinctions with U.S. employment law and the regulatory environment around the employment relationship.
Okay. Jason?
And for my aspect, there are two important considerations with respect to intellectual property law. One, to assess the scope of your rights, your patent rights and your trademark rights in the US. And two, to evaluate freedom to operate. Can you bring your product to market? Can you make and sell it in the US? Can you use your brand name with a comfort level that you're not going to run into a litigation issue?
Okay. Becky, do you have anything to add on that?
Not particularly. I think those on the due diligence side, again, those are more of the very detailed side of things. I think mine would be more from the side of whether the product's right for market, so taking that step back in terms of before you're making that decision. But research definitely in terms of the litigation side and insurance costs of operating in the market.
Yeah, I think the thing I'd add is that there's various types of due diligence to consider and to carry out, but it does need someone to coordinate it all. Otherwise, what tends to happen is there's a lot of overlap and we're actually asking the same questions to different people or same people, and you need a strategic approach to it. I think it's probably what I would add. Okay, well, we can move on now to some of those individual topics. So, Larry, you're going to talk about the types of business law issues to the UK business.
Right. So this is obviously going to be pretty brief. So I just want to highlight a couple areas that in my experience that I think would be of interest to you. Now, obviously, we're going to be running through a lot of topics here. So hopefully, if people are comfortable putting questions into the chat room, then we'll circle back just because we want to try and get through our presentation and then be glad to answer questions either with the remaining time or following that if people want to join. So the first area that I've learned where there's significant distinctions are in the area of distribution of products. So just real quickly, there's basically 4 ways to sell goods in the US from as a foreign supplier. One is you sell direct to a customer. You just have the customer issues you a PO and you figure out how to ship it to the customer. Second, you have what we call a sales representative and what in England you would call a sales agent. So this is a person that's in the States and they are out boots on the ground soliciting orders. They submit the purchase order to the English company, and then the English company decides whether to accept that purchase order or not. And the sales rep makes a commission on that, but they do not take title to that. And the English company keeps control of which customers and can control the pricing also. The big difference is in the US, unless you're in specific industries like sale of goods to automobile related parts, in general, the company is permitted to terminate a sales rep on whatever the contractual period of notice is. A lot of them are just on 30 days, some are 90 days. So the company may terminate those if they want to set up a different arrangement. I know in England and in Europe, sometimes You run into litigation with the terminated sales rep over what they call goodwill, for the goodwill that the sales agent has developed in the market. And that can, going the other way for American businesses doing business in Europe, that can be a very unpleasant surprise. The other business model is a distributor. This is a company that would actually buy and then resell the goods. It's pretty efficient. The distributor determines how much inventory to maintain, but the distributor also decides who the customers are and what the pricing is. And again, in the US, I think more similar to England and Europe, the company generally, if it's structured properly in England and Europe, those relationships can be terminated without a big goodwill payment. So in the US, it almost never, again, unless there's a unique type of business where it's protected, the company is permitted to terminate a distribution arrangement without having to make damages payment. The fourth one, and the one that gives you the most control over the product distribution and all the matters related to the knowledge that's developed as you're conducting business, is to organize your own subsidiary in one of the US states. And obviously that's the most control, but again, then you have to have employees, you have tax registrations, so you really have to balance whether that makes sense. And so you might want to start with one and then move to 2 or 3 and then maybe go to 4 once there's enough business to justify the expense. So if you are going to pick a subsidiary, then the question is, what type of entity do I select and which state do I organize under? Now, obviously we're Ohio based. We believe Ohio is a very pro-business state. Ohio has very good, clear business laws. If you are, and I'm sure a lot of you hear about Delaware Corporations, and depending on the type of business you're going to have and your plans for the future, if you're planning to go public or if you're going to have investors that are putting in millions of dollars, you might want to consider Delaware. And the main reason for that is it's not so much a tax benefit. Actually, Delaware has become kind of difficult lately with tax laws. The main reason for doing that is Delaware has a strong protection of the management of a company, what they call the business judgment rule. So as long as you're using business judgment, you're going to be protected. Now, Ohio has similar concepts, it's just not as well developed. So you can also set up either a corporation, which has been the old workhorse for a long period of time. Most of the states now have limited liability company called LLCs, which are much more flexible as far as need to comply with formalities, and tax-wise, you can do whatever you want with an LLC. So generally, unless there's a tax reason, you probably would set up an LLC. Just real quick, it looks like I'm running out of time. In a business acquisition in the US, and we'll talk about employment non-competes later, but as far as the business non-compete, if you buy a business in the US and you have a reasonable period of time, say 3 years, 2 years, 3 years in the States, that's going to be enforceable. The threshold currently for an acquisition is $92 million before you need the government approval. That's unless you're involved in an area that has national security implications. And then there's a more elaborate procedure. And my legal update is that as part of a recently enacted, actually part of our defense spending authorization bill, there's going to be a new law called corporate transparency. And this is to facilitate enforcement of money laundering laws. But any company in the US that's a reporting company and it's not exempt is going to have to file a document with the federal government that sets forth who the owners of the company are. So to be exempt, the way they define it is you're exempt if you have at least 20 full-time US-based employees, you report at least 5 million in revenue, and you have a physical presence in the US. So if you don't have all 3 of those and you have a US business entity, you're going to have to file this new form with the federal government that discloses the ownership. Now, maybe it's a subsidiary of an English company, that's not a problem. Maybe it's fairly obvious, you have it on your website. But for a lot of businesses, they don't like to disclose who their owners are, a private company. So the law just was enacted. There's no regulations. We don't know what the form's going to require, but we'll learn more about that as we go.
Yeah, I guess the thing I'd add to that, Larry, is that the rules about disclosing who the underlying owners are of businesses is something that's already here in the UK and has been for about 5 years. So for most UK companies, wouldn't be a big change from that. It's just another requirement you have to be aware of rather than something that's likely to cause.
That's true.
Just sort of one point occurred to me is, are there any, if you want a Delaware company or a company in particular state, are there any rules about who can form that company for you, or can that be someone from another part of the US?
Oh, to organize the entity?
Yes.
It's very simple here. I mean, you can either have one of the owners or a lawyer or an accountant. It's really not a big formality here, that whoever the organizer is.
Okay, so it's easy enough
to and the document you file is very simple. You just file articles of organization for an LLC, and they list the name, whether there's any complicated ownership structure, and a statutory agent to receive notices. So the public filing is very simple here.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, we're out of time on that topic. Let's move on. Thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
Let's move on to Jessica, who's going to talk about in more detail the employment issues the UK company should be thinking about if they're going to conduct this in the US. Over to you, Jessica.
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. So employment law in the United States is going to be regulated by a patchwork and layer of laws and agencies from the federal to the state and municipal levels, each with varying degrees of restrictions and protections. Typically, we think of federal law as setting the floor for what is required in the employment setting and the employment relationships, with states and local municipalities adding their own flavor in terms of increased employee protections. There's some limits on that to the extent of their jurisdiction, and in certain cases, federal law will preempt those attempts by states to have greater protections. As a general rule, employment in the US is at will. And this is different than in the UK. This means that the employer or the employee are free to terminate the relationship at any time, for any reason, and without notice. Now, as with all general rules, there are exceptions. The same is true of the at-will employment relationship. Namely, employers cannot fire employees for illegal reasons, such as discriminatory reasons or retaliation. And what I mean by that is we have a network of laws that protect employees from being fired due to a protected status or characteristics, such as their race, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, or disabilities. We also, in the US, prohibit employers from retaliating against employees and firing them for engaging in protected conduct or complaints. And these can look like raising safety concerns, opposing discrimination in the workplace, or exercising other federally or state protected employment rights, like organizing in a union or requesting disability accommodations or seeking unpaid leave. So in terms of enforcement of the anti-discrimination and anti-retaliation laws, those are enforced administratively by federal and state agencies, and also through civil litigation. And Chris will speak more to this later about civil litigation in the US and the jury trial system. So in terms of how we memorialize the terms and conditions of employment, there's no requirement in the US that the employer provide the employee any kind of written contract or document as proof of employment. Often a simple offer letter is all that's used to convey the terms and conditions. Again, this is not something that's required. When there are written contracts, employers in the US are free to include restrictive covenants, and you would see these, I think Larry mentioned, in distribution agreements. You would see those types, sort of similar in employment contracts. You may see non-competition, non-solicitation clauses. These clauses are generally enforceable, so long as they're reasonable and not broader than necessary to protect your legitimate business interests. Now, there's, again, exceptions. There are some states that ban these types of agreements altogether. That's not the case in Ohio. In Ohio, they're enforced to the extent they're reasonable. Certainly, there are industries where they're more limited, and that would be beyond the scope of this call, but something to keep in mind. I always check on the local rules regarding contracts with employees. With respect to compensation in the US, we do not have paid holiday leaves here. There is no federal paid sick leave. There are some states that provide protection in the form of paid sick leave, but Ohio is not among those. Employees who do need leave or for childbirth or medical reasons or to care for a family, they are protected under certain federal and state laws, but it's a job protection for unpaid leave. With pay, we do have overtime laws in this country that when certain employees work over 40 hours, they are entitled to an overtime boost to their paycheck. For this, employees are classified based on their job duties and as either exempt or non-exempt from those overtime laws. Your typical hourly non-exempt employees would be someone working on the line in a manufacturing plant, perhaps, retail workers, clerical workers, and again, they'd be entitled to overtime, whereas exempt professionals such as lawyers, doctors, attorneys, management executives, they would have to be paid on a salary basis. As far as additional sources of protection, employees may organize and join unions in the United States, and often they can enter into collective bargaining agreements with employers that will change the conditions and terms of employment. They can negotiate then on pay, benefits, leave, things that maybe they're not otherwise would be entitled to under federal or state law. They can have those additional protections. That private sector labor law is subject to the jurisdiction of a National Labor Relations Board. Those disputes are typically resolved through an agency administrative process or arbitration, which is outside our usual courts civil litigation process. And finally, with respect to an issue that's always a hot button topic here in the States is healthcare. So we do not have universal healthcare in the United States or single payer. Rather, we have a network of private healthcare insurance companies, and employers in the US are required, if they have more than 50 full-time employees, to provide those employees with and their dependents with private healthcare insurance coverage. If they fail to do so, they may be responsible for shared responsibility payment to the government in the form of a tax. That is really just the general overview of employment law. As I said, you have to be mindful of key local and municipal distinctions. And I turn it back to, I think, I don't know if Christy had anything to add on the tax side of employment, but I leave that to her.
I had a couple of questions for you, Jessica.
Sure, Stuart.
So are there lots of variations between states in terms of the detail of how employment and labor law works, or are there essential principles that are set at a federal level and that tend to dominate how you deal with your staff?
Sure. So for example, in terms of anti-discrimination laws, for a while, and it was recently resolved at the Supreme Court, our Title VII law did not protect on the basis of sexual orientation or gender preference. And while that was disputed at the federal law level, there were states that had enacted such protections. Ohio is not among them. But that was recently resolved that the court interpreted Title VII to reach the scope of that protection now to transsexual, gay, lesbian, LGBTQ community. So that's one example where there can be a conflict between the federal law setting that floor and state law kind of filling in the gaps and maybe getting out ahead of those changes.
Okay, that's great. So another question I had was, my understanding is that employers in the US don't have any obligations to account for any employee tax to the tax authorities, and that's purely something that staff need to deal with themselves. Is that right, or is that again something that varies from state to state?
So no, I think that employers have certain withholding obligations for their employees. They have to withhold the federal, Medicare, Medicaid taxes, Social Security benefits. I'm not a tax lawyer or accountant, so I really can't speak to all the ins and outs of those. You can certainly have independent contractor relationships, and those would be exempt from those withholding requirements. But there you typically have to evidence that relationship with a separate written contract. and the employer really is not supposed to exert as much control. An independent contractor should freely be independent to choose the how, where, when, and why of how they do their work. But anytime you have that layer of control and you've created now an employer-employee relationship, now you're going to be subject to these federal laws on taxation and protections for discrimination, disability, what have you.
Yeah, and Jessica, the employer, if it's an employee or employee, the company issues what's called a W-2 that goes to the federal government. So it'll identify what your income is, the compensation. And if you're in a contract, they call it a 1099. That also gets sent to the federal government.
If I could pop in on a larger scale, what happens in the US that's different from the UK is every US citizen is required to file their own individual tax filing based on a calendar year. That doesn't, no matter what kind of employee they are. And regarding payroll taxes, there are several payroll taxes that are withheld from the employee's wages that are then remitted to the various governmental entities, federal and state, and sometimes local. And then the employer portion is they match Social Security and Medicare, and they have to pay what's called unemployment. Sometimes it's called insurance, sometimes a tax to the state in which they are paying the employees, and also on a federal level. So there are layers of employee taxes, employer taxes, and the employer has the responsibility of remitting all of those taxes to the proper authorities. And then with a wage statement, each individual files their own tax filing every year.
Good. Stuart, we have a question from William that is relevant. Okay.
Yeah, so the question from William Mannering is, above the 50 staff level, what proportion of the family stroke dependents healthcare insurance cover must be met by the employer?
So this is one I'd have to get back to William. Healthcare varies by state in terms of it's regulated at the state level and at the federal level. As far as the share, I know it can range. We have Cadillac plans where it's 90% employer covered, 10% employee. A lot of times it's 80-20. I'm not sure what the threshold is, what the absolute minimum is.
Yes, so I think even if an employer is subject to being over 50, being subject to having an insurance coverage for the employees, within that there's a large variation, and almost in all instances, the employee pays probably 20 to 30% of the cost of that policy, that coverage. So it's not free to the employee, even if they have coverage.
And sorry, Larry, just to add to that, there's a difference there between perhaps the employee coverage and the family dependents coverage in that, is in terms of that split. And I've been hearing it might be higher for the employee coverage in terms of, sorry, for the employee only for the employer's contribution, but perhaps less for the family and dependents coverage. Is that common? Right.
So typically, if you have a family coverage, it's going to cost the employer more to have that. So then the portion that the employee has to pay is increased.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we'll need to move on now. It's time for Jason to tell us more about protecting brand, products, trademarks, and IP generally.
Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, there are really two aspects to intellectual property: protecting your own inventions and brand names, and then freedom to operate, navigating the landscape of third-party intellectual property. I'll focus mostly on the protection side and give a little bit of IP kind of background as well. When we talk about intellectual property, typically we're talking about patents, trademarks, copyrights, and trade secrets. Given our time, I'm just going to focus on the patent and trademark side. So patents exist to protect inventions, new product, a new method of making a product, a new composition of matter, that type of thing. And the patent right in and of itself, while in the US and many other places we don't like monopolies, a patent really is a limited monopoly in exchange for full disclosure of how to make and use whatever is going to be covered by your patent. we typically talk about two main types of patent: a utility patent, which is there to protect structure and function associated with a product or a method, and then a design patent, which is there to protect the ornamental look. So if you think about your mobile phone, your utility patent would protect a lot of the functionality, maybe even some of the materials that are used in the phone, and the design patent would protect the kind of the look of the product. So as far as similarities and differences between the US and the UK, cost-wise and process-wise on the patent side, it's pretty similar between the US and UK and much of Europe. You can run into provider costs. So if you're in London or New York City, Chester or Ohio, for example, you might pay your attorney or patent agent less to prepare your application. One big difference in the US on the patent side is we still have a 1-year grace period to file a patent application after first public disclosure. Most of the world is what we call absolute novelty. If you have a public non-confidential disclosure of your invention, then you can no longer file a patent application. But in the US, we do still have a 1-year grace period. Another difference is on the software side. Software is recognized in the US as a protectable category. It doesn't mean you don't have to structure your patent application a certain way. In the UK and much of Europe, software isn't quite as loved on the patent side. It's not impossible, but it could be a little more difficult to protect software. Given the timeline of what it takes to get a patent through, whether it be in the US or outside the US, it can be a process of years. Sometimes software providers don't really love the patent route. The trademarks are there to protect names and logos, and trademark law really exists to help avoid consumer confusion and to allow consumers to associate goodwill with a provider of a good or service with the particular brand name, logo, whatnot. If you're going to buy a Mercedes automobile, you're expecting a certain level of quality, and that's associated with the brand. When we look at the trademark side, we look at likelihood of confusion. How similar are two trademarks in how they look, how they sound, connotation, commercial impression, and then we look at the relatedness of the goods and services. And we look at that both in terms of protecting your own brand and then avoiding infringement of a third-party trademark. So you can have identical names or identical brands for very different goods or services. The thought being a consumer wouldn't figure that the same provider of the goods or services is providing both of these things. The more similar the goods or services get, it's a bit of a sliding scale. The more similar the goods and services are associated with respective marks, the less similar the trademarks have to be to run into either a blocking situation when you're trying to register your own brand name or potentially an infringement of a third-party mark. So a big difference the US has from most of the world is we are really a use-based system. Trademark rights typically flow from use of a mark in commerce in the US, and that's different from most of the rest of the world. When we file a trademark application in the US, the two most common bases for filing would be actual use of the mark in commerce. There is no kind of patent, public disclosure time bar or anything like that. You could, in theory, be using a mark for years, decades even, and then decide you want to register it. And then we also have an intent to use basis for registration. Company might not currently be using the mark, but has plans to do so in the future, pending, marketing, research, product development, those types of things. But it is important to note if you're coming into the US, say from the UK, and you've maybe only been doing business in the UK, you can use a UK or other foreign trademark application or registration as a basis to file in the US, and you actually can obtain a US trademark registration based on, say, a UK, prior UK trademark registration. One thing, though, to keep in mind is ultimately to keep your registration in force in the US, you will need to show use of that mark in commerce. The first time to do that typically is about 5 to 6 years after you obtain your registration. Another important caveat, though, is it's possible to obtain, say, for example, a US registration, trademark registration based on a UK trademark registration and have your rights challenged possibly early on in the process. Say you obtain your US registration based on your UK trademark registration, and 2 years down the road, for whatever reason, you still haven't made use of the mark in commerce. You have this registration, but a third party may come and challenge your registration through the filing of a petition to cancel on the basis of non-use of the mark, and that can be successful in the US. So it's just important to know, you know, we are a use-based system. The UK does have use-based rights like the US common law trademark rights, but it's predominantly a first to file jurisdiction. It's typically the party that first files is in a much better position. Applications tend to proceed pretty quickly. Trademark applications in the US, you are 3 to 6 months, usually after your filing, you'll get some feedback from the US Patent and Trademark Office. So that's a little bit on the protection side of things. On the freedom to operate, again, there are two different things, and it's not always an intuitive concept. You can have a patent, practice your invention that's and still infringe a third party's patent. So it's important, especially if you are entering the US, for example, and you don't have prior commercial activity in the US, to conduct the due diligence through a freedom to operate analysis, both on the patent side, where we look at, hey, this product is going to come to market. We engage in a search of sort of all the existing patents that are out there that are enforceable and active, and try to give the clients a comfort level that they can bring their product into the market, either make, use, sell, offer to sell, or import the product in the US without you know, being on the receiving end of a nasty letter accusing you of patent infringement. Similarly, on the trademark side, we do a search of existing trademark registrations and sometimes common law rights as well, to see if there might be that likelihood of confusion type issue that I had touched on before. This will kind of probably segue into Chris a little bit too. If you get to the enforcement side, whether you're trying to enforce your own intellectual property rights, patent or trademark rights, or you're defending against a charge of infringement, it can be a very expensive process in the US, especially on the patent side. It typically is a 7-figure type endeavor on the patent side, and it's something to avoid, you know, wherever possible. We're different from a lot of places abroad where we don't typically have a loser pays type system.
Okay, thanks, Jason. But we're going to need to move on just to keep on track time-wise. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now, who's going to talk about the differences in litigation between the US and the UK.
Oh, thank you, Stuart. And I'm going to talk about litigation, provide an inside view of the Ohio and the United States litigation. The United States litigation has a bad reputation. A lot of people find it quite scary, but in reality, it's not. And there are ways to minimize risk for clients who are in litigation, and I'll touch upon those in a moment. In our system, the United States, we have 2 systems of courts. We have the federal system on the one hand and the state system on the other hand, and they're critically different in a lot of ways. I want to talk about the federal system first. And the big difference in the federal system are the judges. No one grows up to say, I want to be a federal judge. And the reason for that is quite simple. To become a federal judge, a number of things have to happen at the same time. There must be a vacancy on the federal bench. The President of the United States needs to appoint you. You must pass a very extensive FBI background check. And then if you get through there, then you have to go through the Senate. The United States Senate then will have to either approve or confirm the candidate. If you're able to get through those 3 or those 4 things, you become a federal judge for life. Does politics play a role in the selection of judges here in the United States? Well, absolutely, it does. I mean, we can't really avoid that. Republican presidents tend to pick judges who share the same philosophy. So Republican judge, our president will pick judges who have a conservative philosophy. Democratic presidents typically will appoint judges who have a liberal mindset. Now you're probably wondering, why would that make a difference? Especially if justice is blind, which it is. But what is true though is judges, regardless of who you are, you bring your own life experiences to the bench. So generally, judges who are conservative tend to be more pro-business. They're more sympathetic to businesses. Judges who have a liberal mindset tend to be generally more open and more sympathetic to the individual plaintiffs and individual causes. Obviously, there's exceptions that exist in all cases, but we as lawyers, when we counsel our clients, that's part of the calculus that we take into account when our clients are sued or whether we're going to file a lawsuit on behalf of our clients. Now, the state court systems are different, and the major difference, again, goes back to the judges. All 50 states are different, but for the most part, state court judges are elected by the voters. Here in Ohio, judges are elected for 6-year terms, and because they're elected by the voters, they're politicians. They may not admit that they're politicians, but they are. They're politicians who happen to wear black robes. And the reason they're politicians is they have to raise money for campaigns. They have to go out and campaign. And quite frankly, during our election cycle here in Ohio, some of the most brutal campaigns involve judges. And because judges are not there for life and they have to account to their voters, they are sensitive to hot button issues that may be existing at any given time. Now, having said that, my experience in Ohio and across the country, and I've been in state courts all over the country, state court judges do a very good job of setting aside any personal feelings one way or the other, and you get a very, in my opinion, a very fair shot if you're a litigant, whether you're a plaintiff or a defendant. The huge difference, I believe, between our system and the Great Britain system is we have juries. We all have in the United States a constitutional right to have our grievances adjudicated and decided by juries. And it doesn't take any particular qualification to be a juror. We want our jurors to bring their own life experiences to the table when they evaluate a case. We want them to exercise their common sense. And again, in my experience, juries tend to get to the right decision. They may take different ways to get there, but it's our belief that a jury who deliberates over a case, they get to the right decision by the deliberate process, and they are in a better position more times than not to assess the credibility of witnesses. So a question is, what are you better off? Are you better off in a federal court or a state court? Well, the answer depends. It depends on who you are, it depends on who you represent. Most plaintiffs, most lawyers who represent plaintiffs prefer to be in state court. Most lawyers who represent businesses, who are, especially if they're sued, prefer to be in federal court. There are benefits of being in federal court, especially if you've been sued. Most lawyers would agree that the brand of justice in federal court is of higher caliber. The judges, as I indicated, are there for life. They're insulated from the fear of any blowback from a hot button issue or any negative media. Juries in the federal court system, you require a unanimous verdict. State court for Ohio, you only require a 3/4 verdict. Judges in federal court have smaller caseloads. That means they have more time to devote to your cases. And more importantly, in federal court, the judges do a much better job in streamlining the cases. Most cases that are filed in federal court, they're done within a year or two. More complex cases may go on longer, but for the most part, you're in there quicker. Oftentimes, if you're able to streamline the case, it's better for the litigants in terms of the costs. Any discussion about litigation in the United States has to also include civil litigation reform, and we call it tort reform. And tort reform is just a fancy way of saying, let's put a break on some crazy jury verdicts. And some of the momentum for tort reform in Ohio actually goes back several decades. There was a case in Arizona where a woman went to McDonald's, she bought a cup of coffee. Through the drive-through, she took the cup of coffee, put it between her legs, sped away. The lid was not secure on the cup. The coffee spilled, burnt her legs. She then went to McDonald's and said, your coffee was hot and you burned my legs. And McDonald's said, well, it's hot coffee. And she said, well, it was too hot. McDonald's fought it. They took it to a jury trial. And to the surprise of many, the jury awarded this lady $3 million for pain and suffering and awarded $3 million in punitive damages. Now that sent a shockwave through the legal community. It also sent a shockwave through the chambers of commerces throughout the United States. In response, many states, and I think Mindy pointed out, every state is different, and we're a laboratory of 50 states. We can do different things. What Ohio did to respond to that we enacted our tort reform probably 15 years ago. And the tort reform puts a limit on what a jury can do in terms of they cap the amount of damages that can be assessed to most cases. The results have been promising for the business community. Not so well for the legal community because there's less cases, but for the business community, it's been very helpful. Not only has it limited the size of verdicts, but there's less cases that are now being filed, even though the population has been increasing. Now, the good and bad in our civil litigation, again, the answer to that question really depends on who you are and what position you're taking. The proponents of our system, and we have an open system, and that means that everybody, regardless of income level, educational background, religion, creed, whatever, we all have the same access to our court system. And it doesn't take much. You just need to file a complaint, pay the filing fee, and you're off and running, and you're into the court system. And those proponents of our open system would argue that litigation has produced good things for society. Safer products, safer workplace, fairer employment practices, cleaner environment, they can go on. Critics of our system would argue, hold on, it adds a cost. It adds a layer of cost to doing business. But that gets back to the 50-state laboratory thing I was talking about. States like Ohio and many other states in the United States have placed tort reform in place for the purpose of being more sympathetic to the business community. So then the question is, who pays for the civil litigation? Now, Jason mentioned in the patent litigation that can get into the 7-figure range. Quite frankly, that's very rare. Those cases are very rare. It does happen, but most litigation is not quite that expensive. It can be expensive depending on the type of case you have. In the long run, our critics would argue that the cost of litigation is borne by all of us in the form of higher prices for products, higher prices for services, higher insurance premiums. But in the short run, in the United States, unlike the UK, we have the American rule. And the American rule means that if you file a lawsuit and you don't win, you don't have to pay the loser's attorney fees. And the reason for that is it goes back to the access to courts. We want our courts open to all. And the feeling is that if you impose the burden of having to pay the other side's attorney fees, it may have a chilling effect. But there's ways around that to protect businesses. My partner, Larry Crowley, does a great job with this. Contracts that he puts together in a business transaction, he'll insert a clause in the contract that says if there's a dispute in any way arising out of this transaction and we go to court and we win, you have to pay our attorney fees. And those type of clauses are enforced in federal court, state court, all over the country. And that's been very effective. And there's others. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, so sorry to cut across you there. We kind of need to move on just in terms of our timing for today.
I'm done.
Okay. But thank you for that insight into litigation in the US. I feel a bit more comfortable than I did previously about what a lot of what you hear in the news is obviously different to what the reality is in reality. Great. So next we're going to move on to what are the advantages for UK businesses to conduct commerce in the US and in particular Northeast Ohio. So Becky, do you want to give us some thoughts on that?
So to say about the US in general, because obviously the people who are living in Ohio are giving a much better
of course.
Actually Ohio, but I mean the advantages we're all looking, we've had the challenges of Brexit over the last 4 years and never taking our eye off the fact that the US is such an important market for UK companies. It's such a big market, the language, the relationship that we have. So it's one never to be underestimated and should always be explored. It's not for the faint-hearted. So, you know, businesses really need to do their homework, their due diligence. But there is tremendous opportunity for partnership there. And we see some very successful business models. And sometimes it takes companies to think about their strategic positioning in the global marketplace as well. So, you know, we can have many companies for whom actually establishing a presence in the US market rather than just providing some of the other options that were described before in terms of maybe having an agent or a partner sort of direct sales. It rethinks the business model and just puts you a foothold in a different area of the global market. So lots of opportunities, and one we're encouraging businesses obviously to turn to just diversify, move away from dependence, so people aren't over dependent on certain markets. But doing it with caution as well because of the geographical distance, and I think a lot of businesses in the UK do perceive it to be a much more complex market, but it's only complex if you don't understand the rules and you're not aware of how each individual state operates. So I think that's all I'll say from my point, if that's okay, and let the other speakers just put their point across.
Okay, thanks. Christy, you want to expand on some of that and some of the specifics around tax and accounting?
It's simply Northeast Ohio and Ohio in general. We don't have a harsh tax regime like many other states do. And I would like to use our firm just as a quick example. We are a small firm. We have UK ownership. We operate on both sides of the pond. And we don't operate in the locations. We're not in London. We're not in New York. We're not in San Francisco. We are able to successfully service our clients globally and be in areas in both the UK and the US, and in this conversation here in Ohio, for less cost than what it would cost in other parts of the country. And one of those major considerations are the tax implications of where you choose. And Ohio is a great place when it comes to tax.
Okay, are there particular, you mentioned that some states have a more harsh tax regime. That's in terms of just the general rates that there are for taxes that corporations pay?
Yes. Yeah, so I'll quickly give you two examples. New York, if you open an office in New York City, in any of the 5 boroughs, you will be taxed on a state level at over 6% and on a city level, New York City, of over 8%. That adds 15% to your effective tax rate on top of the federal rate of 21%. The city of San Francisco, California has a minimum tax, so even if you have a lost position, you have to pay a tax, and so does New York. And let's take San Francisco as an example, they have 5 additional filings that are scattered throughout the year. And one is actually very expensive because it's based on your payroll and gross revenue. So you take those 2 cities that are very popular and great cities, I will say, but you can come to Ohio and pay, not have that amount of tax or those harsh tax regimes.
Okay, no, it's helpful to know that. I mean, it's different in the UK. Generally, there are national tax rates, and although there are some local payments to make, in the main, it's all about the national rate. Okay, Mindy, do you want to add some more about Ohio?
Absolutely. I think you're hearing throughout this conversation that we want to make sure our UK friends know that this 50 different state strategy is a real thing, and every state is going to be slightly different. So what Ohio is going to represent to you is going to be in a couple of really key areas. One, it's going to represent market access to about 60% of the US and Canadian populations. If you don't know US geography very much, 60% of America and Canada lives on the eastern side of our continent, and the other percentage lives really on the very coast of California, on the West Coast. So 60% of the US and Canadian populations are within what we call an 8-hour truck drive. So certainly that's going to give you access. We also have almost the full complement of whatever your supply chain, value chain could look like, from the raw materials, steel, rubber, elastomers, to the full end market. Of course, we are also in Eastern time zone. So for those of you who'd like to not have to do late night or really early morning calls with the US, you're going to find that, I guess, particularly in this moment right now, I think we're 4 hours difference, and maybe 5 hours when your time changes. But that's so much better than having 7 or 8 hours difference. So we're on the same time zone as New York. And we are in a place where innovation is really rewarded and encouraged. You've heard about, there's a high amount of R&D that happens here, and you've heard already about how IP is protected. Last couple of points, you've heard this before, but we do represent a cost savings in terms of what it will cost to lease or buy buildings, what the cost of workforce will be, what your startup costs will be. It's just going to be cheaper and high value here. And ultimately, we are a friendly, humble people group. And certainly, I think you're going to find us as being a soft landing spot. This is your first US exploration. I think you're going to find it to be just easier and friendlier. We have accelerators, incubators, easy places to get a US foothold with a physical address, which can be important for many companies.
Okay, great. I guess I have some other queries, but they're probably going to be answered, I think, in our next question, where Christy, going to talk some more about tax implications in a wider sense of doing business in the US and Ohio.
It's simple to us because we know it, but it's different from the UK. So just to remember, there are layers of taxation. So we have a federal tax rate currently of 21%. That may go up with the Biden administration. We're yet to see. The tax implications are also on a state level. Some states tax on profit. Some have minimum taxes, even if you are showing a taxable loss. And others, like Ohio, have what's called a commercial activity tax. Some have what's called an excise or franchise tax. So they're all a little bit different, but all very workable. And then also you want to look at what the local tax level could be. So for example, in Ohio, we do have municipal tax implications in some of our cities. In other states, there are not. We just discussed New York City. So those are the big tax implications for setting up. One of the things I always bring up when I talk to new clients too is that starting a new business oftentimes results in a taxable loss in the first year, maybe the first 2 years, because of the expenses paid to set up and move to a new country. In the US, currently, all losses carry forward indefinitely. So even if you come to the US, make that investment, your buck goes a long way again here in Ohio. But if those taxable losses then move forward to help you offset future tax as your business grows and you have more profits to deal with, which is a good thing. And as tax rates go up with each administration, our tax laws change. So if we have a president in for 8 years, you can count on once they change, they're steady for a while. In this case, we have a new president after 4 years, and we do expect federal tax rates to go up. So those losses that you may create when coming to the US will carry forward as you grow and expand.
I mean, some of these questions might be covered actually by Mindy coming up, so I apologize if I'm eating into your topic, Mindy. Are there any sort of tax incentives available in Ohio and US generally? I mean, we have, as you'll know, Christy, in the UK, there are various reliefs you can get for research and development costs, or and there's now a sort of new proposals that certain types of investment will give you a particular benefit from a tax. Are there things like that too?
I will say, and I'm going to segue this over to Mindy, is that the economic development commissions and associations are individually in each state and in each community. So there are incentives. There aren't really any on a federal level that will bring a business to the US, but to you, Mindy, she can talk to this much more intelligently.
Yeah, the short answer to that, Stuart, is that as we've talked about the US as the 3 levels of taxation, the federal, the state, and what we call municipal, and there are tax incentives that are available at the state and municipal levels, potentially, not the federal. And so certainly Ohio, we are an aggressive, competitive state. We really want to get the business. We really appreciate foreign direct investment. And so we do have a tax credit that goes against this commercial activity tax that Christy mentioned. It's Ohio's one and only business tax on your gross receipts within Ohio over $1 million. So that's kind of the threshold. And certainly we can help companies who would be looking to either reduce that or even eliminate that through a tax credit based on their investment goals. Other forms of resources and incentives. One, we can help companies with site selection. You need to find a place to put your footprint in the US. You could hire a property broker to do that, but certainly we can do that for you based on your parameters. We help with talent acquisition. So you want to start out, maybe you need a few people to get started and they need to be people in the US. We can help you find those people. Certainly the cultural connections are going to be important. You're going to hear from the British American Chamber here about what they do, but the expat community I think is important here, the cultural amenities. And then lastly, I would say, of course, you've got a lot of service providers on this call, lawyers, accountant firms, and I would want to underscore that that's actually a really important piece for a UK company is to consider professional representation as you set up and explore the US as a business. You want to set up all of your business needs in the correct way, perhaps visas if you need those, and all of that, in addition to the way that you'll file for tax reasons, all would be beneficial by working through a service provider. So certainly those are probably the main resources that we could provide at a state level.
Okay, I mean, I've got another question and maybe overlaps again between what you've been talking about in India and what Chris was talking about just then. Are there, in terms of taking on property, buying property, etc., are there taxes associated with that, both when you buy property and when you're using it as well?
Yes. So, so if companies were to lease or rent a property, any kind of taxes on that would be going through your lease payment. But certainly, if companies are looking to buy a piece of land or build a new building, there is a sales tax on the building materials, so the wood or the brick or whatever. And so we have programs that can help assuage those costs. In selling it,
I can jump in real quick. So there's not a tax on buying a real estate. There's a tax when you sell it, which in Cuyahoga County is 4% of the sale price. Then once you do own the property, there's a real estate tax, which is depending on the city you're in, is 1 or 2% of the value of the real estate annually. Sorry to jump in there, Mindy.
No, please, thank you. Thank you, Larry. And I'll also say there are the ability for local communities to give companies a property tax abatement so that you either reduce or not pay the tax that Larry just mentioned. So,
so if you negotiate that ahead of moving in, you can get a break on those taxes.
And we'll just say the city of Cleveland does that for development and for new development and new buildings. Right now, there's a 15-year tax abatement.
Yeah, there's actually
tax abatement in the city of Cleveland, and it's a great place to live. So.
Yeah, there's even more tax incentives if you do it in an urban area, designated urban area. So there's lots of tax benefits if you analyze what you're doing with somebody like Christy or myself.
We're going to jump on to the next topic just to ensure we finish on time. So next, a few of you in particular are going to talk about lessons learned and what you can share, sort of briefly, I guess, maybe one from each person. So we have Indy here, but maybe I'll give Chris first opportunity to see what he can share with us that might be useful to help others avoid mistakes.
Sure. So mine are more personal lessons than those that are pertaining to businesses, but there's definitely a few that I've learned that I'll be happy to share. I think the first one is make sure that you're paying the correct taxes. It comes in both good and bad. For instance, when I initially came over as a trainee J1 visa holder, so that's a non-immigrant, I was exempt from paying into Social Security, and that's changed. But when you set up with payroll companies, especially if they're outsourced, you can find that you have to actually tell them to do that manually. Otherwise, you're paying taxes that you don't necessarily have to pay. The flip side to that nice tax break is that as a tax resident in the US, you actually have to report your worldwide income. And there are some investment vehicles in the UK, like a stocks and shares ISA, that are not given the same favorable tax-free status here. So that's something that I would advise checking with a US-UK tax expert. Another thing is that one of the things I did prior to moving out here is I reached out to the Chamber of Commerce that I'm now a part of to get connected to a group that gave me a feeling of, community and a home away from home, so to speak. And I was able to find out more about living in the US in Cleveland and how I could connect other Brits. And it's been nothing but a total pleasure and fantastic to be able to build up my network from there. And I'm glad that I took the step to reach out to one of those local networks.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Do you want to add something briefly to that, Mindy?
Yeah, I'll just build on that to say that it's important that you do your research. So Chris did his research by reaching out to the chamber. Others reach out to Dyke Axley or to Aaron and Partners or Wegman Hessler. So you just need to try to reach out to folks in the US who might give you a perspective before you make any decisions.
Okay. Anyone else from the panel want to add something quickly to that? No? Okay. This is just a sort of very brief, I guess, of mine and Becky's views on how we expect Brexit to impact the business in the US. So I suppose my very short answer is it's probably too early to say. But I think what's true from talking to people in our network is that Brexit has maybe focused some businesses' minds on other opportunities that are out there. So if trading with the EU is going to be more difficult than before, that maybe we should start considering other places too. And the US, I'm sure, will be an obvious choice for a lot of those businesses because of the common language and some a similar approach to business, albeit that obviously a lot of the detail is different. And I guess other people who, I guess the downside is maybe there are people who now perhaps simply put off the idea of trading with the EU and maybe will become more insular than before. But maybe that in itself is an opportunity for US companies to in the UK themselves. My view on it. Becky, have you got anything that you'd like to add to that? Obviously, you've got experience of that type of trading in all those areas.
Yeah, there's been very mixed messages actually. There's been a big wake-up call for many British businesses in terms of what it means to export, and those have only traditionally dealt with the EU. So I think in the longer term, I think Brexit will upskill businesses in the whole international trade process, exports and imports, and maybe encourage them that actually once they know and get to grips with it, that actually it's not such a daunting prospect to export to the US because they'll know, they'll have the toolkit. I think there's a nervousness in terms of trade agreements. Obviously, we don't currently have a trade agreement with the US and we're hoping that we will have one, but there's definitely a nervousness about the controversy that there's been around the unilateral decision by the UK to amend one of the articles on the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that's been purely to protect Northern Ireland. But there's been some tensions that and the fact that the actual trade agreement hasn't been ratified by the EU yet. We're hoping that's going to be next month. So I think there's a little bit of a nervousness. There's a new president in the United States, and I think the world is watching really the UK to see how that relationship plays out with the EU. So I think there's almost an element about, I think businesses looking outward will become more confident and grow, and there are definitely more businesses who are looking further afield. They're saying, do you know what, this is just complicated. Let's look at new markets. But yeah, there's that inward looking as well, because a lot of our trade agreements that we have with other countries, our relationship has changed with them as well, because we are no longer party to EU trade agreements. We've had to make our own. So there's been some quite significant changes and business understanding on what that means. So I think it'll be to the good. In the long term, I think it'll be to the good. But I think there's still some teething problems, and wait and see, hopefully in the longer term, if we can reach an agreement with the US, because that would be brilliant news.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that Biden's approach to the EU, the UK, and I guess Republic of Ireland is different. So we'll have to wait and see as far as that's concerned. Okay. Great. Chris is now going to talk about, he's touched on it already, about the human side of working in the US, relocating there, and what's it like to live and work in the US and Cleveland. So over to you, Chris.
Sure, thanks. So coming from living in London, one of the largest cities in the world, to living in Cleveland was definitely a big change for me. I was rather nervous before going. I must say that everyone here, especially in Ohio, has been more than welcoming. There's definitely a sort of Midwestern hospitality that you definitely don't get anywhere else. I think that one thing that's definitely a big plus is the cost of living on this side of the Atlantic, especially in Cleveland. Your dollars or your pounds go a lot further than they do back in the UK or other places in the US. It's definitely a great place to live, and it has cheaper real estate than other cities. Commuting here is an absolute breeze compared to other similarly sized cities. Lately, since the start of the COVID pandemic, it has been one of the top cities for young people actually moving back to Cleveland, which was originally where they were from. And in 2020, it was the number 5 on the list of places that saw a net gain in residents in the United States. If you're into the arts, which I am a bit, Cleveland has an incredible set of museums. The Cleveland Museum of Art is world renowned, and we have one of the best orchestras, the Cleveland Orchestra, right here in town. Cleveland and the surrounding counties are also rather diverse, you know, and so coming from one of the most culturally diverse cities in the world, it has been great to be able to immerse myself into that culture and not have to miss out on that by moving here. Cleveland is known as one of the biggest foodie cities. We have a regional hub. We're a regional hub for that, and one of the top cities in America for our variety of restaurants. Also, I think something that's definitely been appreciated, especially since the beginning of the pandemic, and we've all been forced to, you know, go outdoors, is that, you know, Cleveland is recognized nationally for its park systems, and they have a vast number of green spaces. You know, I don't utilize them half as much as I should, but the Cleveland Metro Parks spans over something like 23,000 acres. I think there's something like 300 miles of walking and cycling trails, as well as public golf courses. So there's lots to utilize. And I think work-wise, I have nothing but positives to mention. The people here are friendly and are keen to elevate and help each other. It's also a place where everyone knows everyone. And so there's only, you know, 2 or 3 degrees of separation between you and the person you want to be introduced to. And it's been a great perk from a business and a networking standpoint.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I think we're going to start to wrap things up now. So I think we'll, yeah, Larry, do you want to take it from here?
Yeah, I'll just kind of running out of time here, just real quick. So obviously there's a long history with the US and UK, the special relationship, which we hope to continue. Doing business here in the US in general is we're accessible and practical here in the States. Like you guys call us the States. We don't really think of ourselves that way, so it's kind of funny, but that's what we are. We are the States. Ohio is a great place to be. You've heard that already, and there's lots of assistance we can provide.
Okay,
that's it for that. I did see one. There is. Oh, I did see one question here. I don't know if you want me to answer this one. Why we got Christy on here is probably a good idea. So there's a question. Most UK companies offer incorporate rather than an LLC, because the taxation implication flows through the directors. Now, I think historically I have seen that where European companies like to use corporations. I think that's because in the old days you had C corps, and you were able to maintain your tax structure kind of separate that way. With an LLC, it's very flexible, and you can be taxed as a C corp as an LLC. So you can have the same reason for being a corporation, but have the flexibility of an LLC where you don't have to follow all the corporate formalities. Is that, Christy, is that fair to say?
Yeah, what I will, and there's a big misunderstanding oftentimes when UK entities are looking at what to set up in the US. What they have to be careful of, if they become an LLC, who are the owners? You don't want individual UK residents becoming owners of an LLC, because they'll be pulled into the US taxation system. So it's very important that if an LLC is formed, that it's not necessarily a pass-through entity that will pass through to the UK, because that is where there can be real complications, and who wants to be pulled into the US taxation system if they don't have to.
Right.
Okay.
So you can elect to be a C corp, tax as a C corp. Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
If anyone else has any other questions, I think probably in view of the time constraints we've got, is use the contact details to send an email to myself or to Larry, obviously, if it's a US question, and we'll endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible.
Well, really appreciate everyone joining for this program for the UK people learning about the US. Our next program is for American businesses looking to expand in England, and we've scheduled a date of April 29th with the looks like the same time, although will be 5 hours apart instead of 4 hours apart. And hope to have Stuart's firm and other advisors be able to provide similar information on Americans looking to do business in the UK.
Yeah, we look forward to that. And obviously, if anyone has any questions, speak to either of us on US and UK issues. We'll endeavour to answer those questions and the only assistance we need.
Stuart, I'm willing to stay on here if anybody else wants to stay on. Folks are free to obviously go about your day. But sure. I'm going to stick on here for a while if anyone else wants to ask a question. Okay. I guess would we stop the recording here, Judy?
Yeah, well, I'm just going to sort of thank all our panelists today. Thank you, obviously, on behalf of me and Larry, to everyone who's contributed today, and thank you everyone for attending. I hope it's been useful, and it's been great to work together with Larry and his team, and hopefully these are we will, as I say, there is a recording, some slides. There are obviously things that we can circulate for people for you to as a point of reference for the. But thanks again to everyone for participating, and hopefully we'll see some of you again soon on future events, or indeed advice in relation to the US and the UK. Thanks again.
Okay, well said, Stuart. Thanks, everyone.
Okay.